Today I want to have a deeper look into lights in DaVinci Resolve and Fusion. I will start out with a very simple scene to discuss what kind of lights are available in Fusion's 3D environment. Then I will build a very simple 3D scene and light it up with some basic techniques, and then go towards more advanced 2D post-processing techniques where I'm creating some rays and some kind of volumetric effects and show you some tips and tricks how you can create and manipulate lights in 2D that are coming from a 3D scene. The tutorial today will start out simple, but then will go towards more, let's say, intermediate to advanced concepts. If you're on the beginner side in Fusion, I would like to point you to my free training that I have on my website, VFXstudy.com. If you want to look more into creating 3D scenes and manipulating 3D objects, I did a longer tutorial on this last week, which I can point you to. And today it's all about lights. So start up Resolve or Fusion, start with a blank composition, and then let's get started. Before I get started with my real scene, which I'm building from scratch, let me quickly discuss the type of lights based on this super simple demo scene that I have here. It's just a simple plane and a cylinder put on top. And right now you don't see anything because there are no lights. So I can enable the default lighting in the right-click menu, 3D options. There's lighting and shadows. Usually I just click on shadows, which enables lighting at the same time automatically. So there is some default scene lighting, which is necessary to see some basic contrast. So you see just the cylinder and the plane, two shaped 3D objects. And now there are 4 different types of lights, which I already have put in here. You find them in the effects library under 3D light. You find these 4 different types of lights. The spotlight is also here in the quick selection. Let me turn this off. So these are the lights that are available. So let me very quickly tell you what you use for which. As soon as I add any light to the scene, it automatically disables the default lighting in my viewer and uses the lighting that is actually connected to the merge that I'm looking at. You see I have here 2 3D merges. That's what I typically do. I often put all the geometry in one merge and then put the lighting separate. This way I can still go back and see the default lighting here, and here in this merge only I see the merge with the lighting applied. The ambient light, first of all, it's the simplest one. It just lights up everything in a constant way, so it only has an intensity control, and it is just putting light everywhere from all directions. So it gives no shadows, no contrast, nothing. So sometimes you might put a little bit of ambient light in the beginning before you add other lights, so that you have no completely black areas. This way everything is a bit lit, but it has no direction whatsoever. This is the symbol here for the ambient light. It has a position in the scene, but it doesn't matter at all. You can place it wherever you want. It has no impact. Just has positional coordinates because all tools in Fusion have this. Otherwise, no impact. The directional light is getting a little bit more interesting. This has also, again, no impact whatsoever where you put it. You can put it anywhere in the scene. It has no impact, the position, but the orientation of the light has an impact. So you see here these lines here, they indicate in which direction the light is shining. So right now it's shining like from top left down. And if I go into the rotational controls, you can change it. And you see this way at the moment it's from this direction. If I turn it to the other side, the light rays are coming from this direction. Again, the position doesn't matter, and I have now light from one side, so it's directional, but I don't have shadows. So this cylinder is not giving me any shadow. The next light is the point light. This one has no direction, but it has a position. So that's kind of the opposite of this directional light. This has a position. It matters where you put this light. And you see now here in the scene where I put it, you get this nice light effect. And it still doesn't cast a shadow. So I can put it here next to the cylinder, but I don't see a shadow on the other side. But it is shining in all directions, and it is kind of falling off into those directions. If you want to, you can put a decay. So right now there's no decay, so it's lighting really everywhere. If you want, you can give a linear decay and it's falling off. And then you can adjust the rate. With less rate, it's less falling off. With more, it's closer, and then quadratic, it's falling off even faster. And again, you can can adjust this. So point light is local and then shining in all directions. Directional light is not local, it doesn't matter where it is, but it's shining parallel into one direction. Now the last light I have is the spotlight here. Let me quickly connect it. And this one has a position and a direction, which is important. So right now I have placed it here on top. So it matters where it is located, similar to the point light. And it is shining a spotlight onto one area of the scene. So the direction of this light is important. And it can cast a shadow. So first of all, let's have a look here. The shadow I can enable or disable. Let me disable it for now. It is still different from the point light in the sense that it has this cone which you can control. So I have this cone angle here, so I can make a very tiny spot or a bigger one. I can also have, so I have an inside and an outside angle that I'm controlling. So the cone angle is the inside brightest area, and then I have this penumbra angle, I don't know if I pronounce it right, doesn't matter, which is like outside, the outside control. And then there's a drop off which decides between the inside here and the outside here. So if I reduce it, I get it completely towards outside. If I increase it, it goes, I only have my cone angle here, and in between I can get like a soft transition between this angle and this angle, which I control with this drop off. If I want, I can also put a decay, which is again a decay as per the distance of objects. So by default there's no decay, so it's shining into infinity. Now let's enable the shadow, and let's increase this again so that it's on. Now the shadow, one thing which you always have to look for is if the shadow is soft, and there is some setting here. This is, I think, the most important setting, this shadow map size. So if you reduce it, you see that the shadow is very rough, and if I increase it and bring it up, it gets very soft. So what is happening here is Fusion is calculating a map of the shadow, so a projection of this shadow from the position of this light into the scene. And the resolution of this calculation can be controlled via this shadow map size. And this is maybe also the reason why the spotlight is the only light which has this shadow option, because you can imagine if you are having a point light and you're shining in all directions, Fusion would have to calculate in all directions for shadow maps. And typically your camera is only looking at one point, unless you're maybe working with some virtual reality stuff or so. So typically you don't need to do that whole calculation. So with the spotlight, you are maybe a little bit more limited in a sense that you have to control it better where you want shadows and where you want the light to be. But then Fusion is also only doing the calculation of the shadow for that area that the spotlight is actually hitting, and not just everything. And then shadows have controls similar to lights. The density may sometimes be interesting. So if you want it very soft or a very strong shadow, so you can control this. 50% is the default. And then there are some settings for multiple shadows that overlay, which typically you can just leave at the default. So these are the lights that are available. Now let's use them to set up a slightly more interesting motion graphics scene, and let's see what we can do with these lights. Alright, here we go. I'm starting with a simple 3D sphere, and then I will copy it a few times, so a sphere, and will randomly distribute it. So just the standard sphere, and maybe I go into a bigger view here. And to get a little bit of sense of direction, let me turn on the default lighting and default shadows. And starting from here, I can add a duplicate 3D. So Control Spacebar menu, duplicate 3D. This is a wonderful tool for lots of different effects. And I make lots of copies of the sphere now, and then spread them all over the place. So I don't know, 100, 200 copies maybe, just a large amount. Let's bring it into the viewer, and they are all on top of each other. And then you can either distribute them with translation, so then you get some very regular things, or you can go here into the jitter tab, and here you can get randomized displacements in all kinds of directions. So I want them to be spread out like in all directions, something like this. And just by playing, sometimes you get some very nice shapes, and whenever you think you're onto something, you can also click on reseed and you get a new randomization within the same parameters. And perhaps you like something. But actually what I will do, I will quickly, I want something that is symmetrical more or less. Well, I get something cube shaped, but I want the randomization, like the parameters, symmetrical. So I will just link those three together with expressions. Just put an equal sign and then you get an expression, and I just pull the plus onto the first parameter x. I do that for the y and z parameter, and that way y and z are automatically linked to the x parameter, and I just have one control here. So I can control it with one parameter and still have something symmetrical and or cube shaped. And so this is the translation. Rotation you won't see with the sphere, but scale you can see. So let's give it a bit of scale. And now you see some big and some small ones, which is nice. And I think I want this a bit sparser, so let's spread it out a bit. Alternatively, you can just go back to the shape and make the radius a bit smaller here. So this way I have a field of spheres and I can still look through it. All right, so that's the first part. Then I will merge this together with a merge 3D and put in a text 3D. Which I have here. And I am super creative today and just type light. You can, of course, take your favorite quote of the day or whatever. And let's move this a bit. No, this was not it. Okay, let's bring it across positive z direction. So across the blue arrow, we should have it here. And here it's in the view now. Okay. So, and of course, if I have a 3D text, I also like to have some extrusion, which you find here, just to have the text a little bit better. Like this should be fine. Okay, and this is already my scene. So I can now imagine some nice camera move through this. Actually, let's directly, we need it anyways. Let's put another merge and a render node and a camera just to have the scene complete. So we can see the scene and the camera is in the center. So let's bring it back and bring it back maybe a good part towards the end. And I still don't see anything, but what I will do now is I will rotate this a bit and perhaps even animate this. So if I want to animate the whole thing, what I can do is I can just, after the duplicate, use a 3D transform tool, Control spacebar, transform 3D. And here I can rotate around the green axis, which is y direction. So if I rotate, I can do this. Okay, so let's do this. And also now you see there's one in the center. This is the original one before I copied, which doesn't move at all. And maybe I don't like this so much. So what I might do is just take the original one and shift it a bit to the side, so that this whole thing is a little bit off the center. And now I have my original center ball also rotating around together with all the others. And of course we don't have lights and shadows yet. That's why everything is here black and white. I think the checker underlay I will disable today. I don't need it, but just black and white for now. And we get some lights in a second. Before, let's finish the animation. Or let's do some animation here. So I'll just put this on 0 at frame 0, put a keyframe, and at the end frame maybe, I don't know, 90 degrees or 180, or let's see how it looks like. And this way, just look on the left maybe. You see, we have some small rotation. And then the camera, where is it? Maybe I put it all the way out. Okay, feel free to add some camera movement if you like, or maybe I do some at the end. But for now, this is my basic 3D scene setup. That's already it. And now I add the lights. So let me make a bit of space here, and I add the lights directly in here. And I want to have one light which is actually lighting up the word light itself. and I want to have something spread out from the middle and illuminate all the spheres from the middle. And this I can do with a point light. I don't need shadows for this, but I want something that goes in all directions. So let's add a point light. Control spacebar for the menu, point light. Here we have it. Or you can always get it from the effects menu and then in the light section. I prefer this. And let's see, now I have the version with the default lights, and if I go into this merge and turn it on, I get the actual lighting, or at least a preview version of this. So here I have the point light. I bring it in front so that it lights actually the word. And let's bring it maybe a little bit up so that it shines into the text a bit, and then shines in all directions. Let me directly in the renderer also enable lighting and shadows. And you see what's happening here. So I actually get some light from the center, which is going out. Let's get some frame where we see the whole word. Yeah, maybe like this. Okay, that's a good start. I think I want this to be not infinite, but actually limit this a bit, give it some decay. So let's try the linear decay first. So now we just have the center, and I can reduce the decay. So this way it's very bright in the center going out. Maybe let's try the quadratic one, how this looks by difference. This is a bit less, it's a bit difficult to control. Okay, maybe the linear is giving a better result. Now it might be a bit too bright in the center, so let's reduce the intensity. I don't want it to overpower everything. And then I want to make it a bit yellowish, like a candle or fire or room light, a bit warmer. I think this may be going somewhere. Okay, so you can experiment a bit with the decay rate and linear, quadratic, adjust it to your liking. And with this I have the first radial light source, which kind of from the word light or from the center of the scene illuminates a bit outwards. And the second light I want to place now should go from one corner, should be directional and give some kind of specularity on the top sides of the spheres. So that's my idea. And for this I want to place a light in the right corner here, which goes onto all of these spheres and lights them a bit from the background. And for this I could again use a point light, or I could use a directional light, but I think I will go with a spotlight this time, because I can also focus it on the center and then use this cone angle to decide how far the spotlight goes outside. So let me add here next to the point light, let me add a spotlight and bring it up to the corner here. And then what is always nice for lights and cameras, often you just want them to point into the center. So I just click here, use target for the pivot, and that automatically rotates the light to the center of the scene, to the target, and the target by default is in 0, 0, 0, and that's perfect for this scenario. So the light is already now targeted here. Let me bring it a bit closer. So I just put it over the top, this top corner. And as I rotate it around, it automatically focuses again on the center. Okay, so this way. And now I think that's almost good. Let's have a look at the settings here. And I can first, let's see the angle. So I want the center focused. I want like a beam through the center. But then I also want maybe a bit more. I want it to softly decay a bit towards the outside, so I still get a bit more. So let me get this outside angle so that I barely touch the end of these spheres. So just like this. So I still see a little bit here. I'm mostly looking at this. I don't look much at this right now because the camera I can still reposition and move later. So if it looks good in 3D, I'm definitely on a good path. And the drop off, let's see, these are the extremes, right? So just something where I barely see that it's going to the edge. Yeah, maybe just the default seems to be good because it kind of goes really between the two angles. Okay, I don't want it white, I want a different color, so let's do something bluish. So we have yellow from the one side and a bit bluish color from here, bluish purple. You feel free to experiment with this. And now I can look at this one here as well. Yeah, I think this is something I like. Okay, let's bring the intensity down a bit so that this is just like an accent but not dominating too much the purple here. Let's see a bit in the animation. And I think this is starting to look fine. Okay, so we have some kind of blue background light, but very directional, and we have the yellow light here. Now let's think about the shadows. The spotlight here is casting shadows, but shadows from one sphere onto the next, I don't think this is something I'm going for at the moment. So you see here these shadows. If you want this, you definitely have to work on the shadow map, but I think this looks not very comprehensible in this scene, so I think I want to turn them off. Where do I have them? Here. Let's just turn them off. Okay, so I don't work with shadows in this scene today. Okay, so this is my basic setup. I will save this. Of course, if you want to follow along, you can download the Fusion files that I'm creating from my website. You can also import them into DaVinci Resolve. And then from here, let's now go into 2D and add some rays into this scene. So Fusion doesn't really have any tool to create rays directly in 3D, at least not that I'm aware of. I don't think there's any simple way. So most people do it in 2D, and these are all, I have seen a few tutorials where it's being done. And the difficulty is not so much getting some rays, but the difficulty is getting it integrated in a nice way with the 3D scene. And for this, we can use a few tricks. So first, let's get some rays and then think about how we can get it together. Getting some rays is relatively easy. There's actually a tool called rays. And let me just add this and see how it looks like. This is how it looks like by default, and I think it's not so bad. Again, you can adjust a decay rate to make these beams a bit longer or shorter, depending on what you want. Maybe if you want it over the whole scene, make it a bit longer. Then there's a threshold which decides which parts of the scene all emit rays. So if you want them from the sphere, from the lightest points, then you bring the threshold up. If you want less intense parts of the scene also to create rays, you can bring it down. So I want it from the center mostly. And then with the exposure, you can also make it more intense, or with the rate, you can bring it up like this. Maybe bring the exposure a bit down, the weight a bit up, something like this. So this is a good start. If you want to break it up and want to make the rays more look like some atmospheric effect through some fog or so, then a simple way would be just to mask it with a simple noise. So let me just do this, fast noise, just a fast noise texture here, and if you want, you can even animate it and so on. But fast noise, just a very useful tool which creates noise. As the name suggests, I can bring the scale up, and you see if I use this as a mask, you see directly what is happening. So I'm using this noise pattern as a mask to my rays tool, and my rays now get interrupted like this. So you can make it softer, smoother, more detailed, less detailed, whatever you think it should look like. So if you want it softer, bring the detail level down. If you don't like these rays to be that sharp, and completely, these straight sharp lines, maybe you want to blur them a little bit. That's also possible. So what you could do is disable the merge over, and you still see a lot here, perhaps even multiply by the mask. So this way the background scene gets multiplied also by this pattern. So this way I have like rays extracted, and now I can merge those rays over the original scene again, which should look pretty much the same way as the original one before. Let's see. So here I have my rays alone, and here I have my rays on top of the scene. And now this way I have separated it, and I can here, for example, just include a simple blur tool. Or you can use glow or other things. So now you could blur the rays a little bit. Or maybe you want to blur them first and then multiply with the noise pattern, do that afterwards. So there are different ways how you can manipulate and adjust these rays depending on your preference and how you think it should like. Now, rays are one option. Just quickly, one other option is the directional blur tool. I have seen a few tutorials that do this. Also, if you search for volumetric light, you may find Shetal made one tutorial. I saw some even some macro in Fusion which was basically built around this tool. So there are some other options. So just to show you this quickly, directional blur is a nice tool. So if you attach the scene to the directional blur, you have a center, same as with the rays. The rays also have a center, by the way. I didn't mention it because it was already in 0, but you can adjust, you know, from where the rays are originating and from where they are spreading out. So the blur here, directional blur, has a center point as well. Then you have a blur length, and you can make it radial so that it goes in all directions. And you see here already what's happening. Let me disable the underlay. So you see I'm blurring the whole image and getting some rays which can also glow, and you can make them even longer, you know, and you're getting something like this and can further process this. So this directional blur is another alternative. I've seen it being used a few times, and so I thought I should mention this. Now, when I play back the scene, I actually see that I have two issues with my current approach. First of all, I am creating rays from the whole scene and not only from the word light, so not only from the center. Second of all, I have some issues that my light rays here completely vanish when the text light is being blocked, because then of course I have no bright parts in the scene. So whatever I do, I will not get any brightness values from this, right? And the third problem is, even when I get all my rays, like here, you see here, even the sphere here, which is in the front, so this is rotating far in the front, is completely covered by the rays. And if this is supposed to be three-dimensional, I would assume that most of the rays here should be behind that sphere and not in front. Now, there are some problems here which are resulting from the fact that I'm working in 2D, and I want to mitigate this a little bit by splitting the 3D scene into two and separating out the light source. So let me do this. I will keep my complete renderer here from 3D, but I will not use this one to create the light rays, but instead I will create a second scene which only contains the word light, which is my main source here, and I will use this one for the light rays. Let's do this. So I will just do an instance copy of the renderer. Instance copy, Control-Shift-V, or you can make a regular copy, but the instance assures that all the parameters are linked, so both the renderers are doing exactly the same. Then I will detach this merge with the camera and the lights. Let's detach this, and I will put this separately, and maybe I just put another merge here, and you will see why. Because this way I can link this whole group in here. And now in the merge node, I have to enable pass-through lights. And what this does is, this means that these lights are not only working in this merge, but they work onwards in the scene that is coming in any merge afterwards. So these two lights and the camera, let's bring it. These two lights and the camera, they are living in this merge, but now they are also lighting up this merge. Sorry, somehow this was disabled. So here we go. So the cameras and lights work and light up the whole scene. Now I will also put a merge up here and attach this text node into this scene. And I can just bring it up here. And I will bring the same camera and light group into this scene as well, and put it here in the instance renderer. And this way I have the word light here in this second renderer, and this word is lit and filmed exactly the same way as it is in this scene. So even now I don't think I see the blue here, but maybe I would see it if I move the camera closer. So whatever I change to the light and to the camera, it will be exactly reflected in the second scene here. and the second scene is filmed with the same camera and gives me the same output image. And I will now use this one here for my light rays. So instead of the lower scene, I will use this scene. Now I have ensured that my light rays still exist even if the word light here is blocked in this scene. So my rays are now created independently of the blue spheres and they're only being created based on the word light. Now the issue here is still I have merged them completely on top, right? I could turn this around. Control T is to switch the inputs. Control T just to switch foreground and background. This way my light rays are all in the background and nothing is in the foreground. If you want, you could do some 50% solution, maybe put them in the foreground and then, merge a second one in the background, do a little bit before and behind. But actually what I want to do is I want to have a merge which decides where to put the rays based on the distance of the spheres towards the center. Distance may be too difficult, but what I can get is the depth value. So I can ensure that I have a merge which is controlled by the depth. And to do this, I can use the Z depth. And let's enable this. So in the renderer, I can go here into output channels and enable the Z channel. If you like, I did once a complete tutorial on Z depth and how to use it for fog and other effects, and I can link it here somewhere in the cards, so you might want to check it out. And here is a perfect application for this. So I just enable this Z channel. Now I have depth information for the whole image, and I can use this depth information now. I could use it directly in the merge and could use here enable depth merge and sample the distance. And now you see that there are no light rays in front of this sphere because this sphere is in the foreground, much further before the word light, but you see light rays in front of this sphere because this one is in the background. Now this approach may look quite good for the foreground and for the far background, but if you now look through the scene, you can still find some problems which are caused by the fact that the light rays are basically now a plane in the middle of the scene, right? So I have the foreground, I have the background, and the light rays are just at a certain depth position. And let's see where we can see this here. In the beginning, if I look at this sphere, you see that it's now in the foreground. There are no light rays in front of this sphere. And actually, I can disable this blur. I don't, just for demonstration now, so the light rays are sharper and better visible. And now if I go through, you see it's moving here from the foreground to the background in a hard way, right? So you see how the sphere is moving through the plane of rays, which is via this merge put at a certain depth position, right? And the depth I just sampled before. So this I want to avoid. So I would rather have something which is not so perfect in the foreground and maybe not so perfect in the back, but somehow is going a bit smoother between the foreground and the background. And I can do this as well. I will use the Z channel again, but instead of doing a merge at a very specific depth, I will do a merge where I use a mask, and this mask I create from the depth, and I want a mask which is stronger in the background and weaker in the foreground, and somehow blends between what is far in the back and what is far in the front. Okay, let me create this mask now from the depth information. And working with the Z channel itself is not very easy. Most tools don't support it, but I can copy the Z channel into a color channel, and then from there I can manipulate it, color manipulate it, and put it back into a mask channel. So to do this kind of channel logic, I can add the channel Boolean node. You find it channel Boolean, the second one, the regular channel Boolean node. Let me add this in, sorry, not here, and bring it in from the whole scene. And here I can add any channel. For example, I use the red channel and add the Z buffer to the red channel. So now it's taking the Z values and it's adding those to the red channel. I have to pay a bit attention to my color resolution, here I'm in Fusion Studio, and by default I have here integer 8 coming out of my 3D renderer, and this does not support floating point values, but the Z channel always needs floating point values. And also for color, it's actually nicer to get into a floating point, to a higher color resolution. So I will go into the renderer node, and here in the image settings depth I change to float 16. So float 16 or float 32 will both do it. In DaVinci Resolve, usually it's already set to float 32, I think, by default if you don't change it, which is often overkill, so often you can reduce it. But 16-bit floating point should be enough for nice color gradients, and also for calculations outside of the 0-1 color range. So the Z depth starts with 0 at the camera and then goes into depth until minus something. So here you see, right now you see minus 39 for this and minus 33 for the text here. So you see this, and now it is being copied to the red channel, because the red channel, now that I changed it in the renderer, also supports floating point color. This channel Boolean, I can go to a bitmap tool, bitmap, and bitmap is nice to bring any form of image into the alpha channel, and here I can bring my red channel back to the alpha channel. And I will now do some corrections to get this into the 0-1 range that I need here. So for this I can just adjust the low and high values, and I know here that my light is minus 33.8. So I can just enter here minus, and maybe I start a little bit behind, minus, I don't know, 35 or so, and then go up to minus, and I can just try something maybe 25, so that I have a certain range. Let's see how this looks like. So you now see a grayscale image which has bright parts here in the front and very faint towards the back. So that's maybe a good starting point. And if you want, you can do more on this. You can do a gamma correction on this, but not in this tool, so you would have to do a color corrector afterwards if you want to do this. But here I can also adjust, so I can bring this further up, so you see that the foreground gets a stronger white and the background a lighter gray. And I can bring, if you bring with this slider, I can bring in even the furthest spheres in the background and draw them out in the other direction, and the same here for the foreground. So around the word light is where I want the action to happen, so this is actually what I want. So let me attach this mask now into the merge. So I disable this depth merge again. Now everything is in the foreground. Let's attach the mask. Now the mask is now masking out only the spheres in the foreground. Let's invert that. I can do here apply mask inverted. And now the brightest part are the foreground areas where I don't want the light rays in front. So those are being masked out. And the background, if I have any sphere far in the background, you have the light rays completely in front, and in between you will have something like here, you have them completely in front of them, and in between you have some semi, for example this one here, which corresponds to this sphere. You have a semi-transparent version, so you have some light rays behind and some before, you could imagine like this. And if I look at a few different frames here, for example here you have this very nicely sharp covered, but here it's behind. Here we have some in the background, here more in the foreground, but not fully. And here you see some in the more in the back, some more in the front. So I think this is turning out quite nicely. You could still have a few issues. For example, some spheres which are very close to the word light might be completely in the range, and you might still have a little bit of problems there. But all in all, I think I get some good control on this. Now you can further fine-tune this, maybe put some ellipse mask or so if you want some effect which focuses more on the center and then goes outwards. That could help a little bit. Another idea is you could again merge maybe a blurred version of the light rays on top. If you want some kind of diffuse light, then I would do it maybe like this. So perhaps just, take those rays, add a strong blur here, something really strong like this, and then use this and merge it on top of the foreground. I can use again the same mask here, this time not inverting it, and this time I have a way to control some very diffuse light, but it's still the same light that is being generated by these rays, even with some distribution where it's darker here and brighter towards the center. So I get this distribution out of a blurred version from the light rays and can use this to add some diffuse color. Of course, I could also add ambient light into the scene, but this would just light up everything, and this way I get something which is more local. Okay, so with my light rays behind and a little bit of diffuse light in the front for the foreground elements, I think I'm getting pretty good here. One thing, I can look at the edges. Now one thing I see is they're a bit zigzagged here and the gradients are not so smooth, so maybe I need to increase the resolution of the grid size of the spheres. Maybe I need to go into the anti-aliasing settings of the renderer node as well. So there are a few 3D rendering aspects that can maybe improved a little bit if you do a bit of troubleshooting here. But all in all, let's say I'm mostly okay with that part, and it's not the point of today's tutorial. But purely from a light perspective, what I still want to do is get a little bit of a light wrap around these spheres. So sometimes you see that light, if you see light on sharp edges, like the edges of the sphere, you sometimes see that light is a bit bleeding over, so you can simulate this. The question is again, where do you get these edges from? And different ways to do it. Here in this case, I think I will use the Z channel again, because my Z channel has these all these spheres nicely, especially the ones in the front where it's most relevant. In the back, the ones which are behind the light source, they shouldn't have a light wrap, right? So I will again use this as a mask, but now I only need the edges and I can get them from a filter. There are other ways to do it. You can work with erode, dilate, subtract masks and so on. There's a lot you can do with mask manipulation. I will just add a filter tool here, filter, and use again here from here the Z channel from this channel boolean from this bitmap, but I don't want it as a mask. I need it as the input to the filter, as the main input, and then I set this filter to Sobel, and this filter is giving edges, so this is giving clean edges. Of course, there are some problems when the spheres are pretty close to each other. You don't see this edge, but this should be fine. If they are close to each other, there shouldn't be much light. On other cases, here you actually do get the inside edges as well if there's a good distance between those spheres. So all in all, I think these are the edges where I want to see the light spilling over. So let's quickly do this with another merge, and using again here the blurred version of my rays. I will use this again, merge it over and mask it with this filtered version. Now I do have the spillover, but I have a very hard filter here, so I can blur this filter a bit, and then you can decide how far it should spill in. Of course, if you go too far, it might not be realistic, maybe a little bit. The only problem now is the blur goes inside and goes outside, so I need to restrict this a little bit. And I can restrict it actually again with the same bitmap. Since this mask here has the outside edges clean, I can use the same mask to restrict my blur, so I don't use the outside edges. So my only problem now is that the blur inside works, but I have still a strong edge outside. And if I multiply this mask, then I get rid of it. So now I only have the blur itself without the a strong outside part from the filter tool, and I can now adjust the blur the way I want it. You know, make it shorter, stronger, weaker, and in the final result I should see some nice light wrap only around those places where it should be. Okay, alright, there's certainly more you can do to fine-tune the scene, you know, adjust the parameters, play more with this light rays, maybe blur them a bit or add some glow. You can certainly add some accumulation effects for depth of field if you want, or you can do some camera movement. So these kind of things I might do a little bit afterwards, and whatever I come up with I put into the download package. But from the perspective of the topic of today's tutorial, which was lights, I think I have covered quite a bit. So starting with the simple lights, then in 2D doing these light rays, putting them in perspective with the Z depth in the right position, and then even building some light wrap at the end. So I think there was quite a lot to think about and experiment with. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments what you think, and if you enjoy my channel, subscribe, and I see you next week. My name is Bernd. Thanks for watching.